Welcome to the past, where the future was born. This is West Texas Pioneers, a preservation project of the Heritage of Odessa founders and ECISD Television. We're glad you are along for the adventure. In this chapter of our journey across time, we'll share together the memories of another West Texas pioneer. Hello and welcome to another edition of West Texas Pioneers. Dan, I guess they could almost call this segment tonight The Lone Ranger Meets Ben Franklin or something.
That's a good thing, yeah.
Something similar to that. Guest today is Dan Kalenak, and I guess over the years I've had as much fun introducing you as Ben Franklin as anything else, because I've always had the impression that you and Dan and Ben are alter egos of each other in some aspect.
This is very true, yeah. I've been told that by many people. And I'm just so happy that I'm here with you. You love the Lone Ranger, and I just enamored by Ben Franklin, so we have a mutual interest in
the good
individuals.
Guys. Yeah. And you're have carried your love just a little bit further here with Benjamin Franklin and America's Gift to the World. And what a timely opportunity for this to come out on such an anniversary for Ben.
Yes, it's always a pleasure for me to talk in any way I can about Franklin. It's just, I guess, I'm very blessed to be where I am now. I've been led to where I am in Odessa, Texas, here right now with you. It is a culmination of a lot of different events. And it began actually way back when I was in the Army. I never thought in the world that I would make Odessa my home. I never heard of Odessa before.
Now, you were in the Army with Ben?
Come on now. No, I was in the Army.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that one too.
I was in the Army in El Paso in the 40s. A group of us men in around New York were drafted into the Army, and we were sent to Fort Bliss. Nobody knew where Fort Bliss was. I didn't either. Nobody in the Army did that was there at the time. So we were sent to Fort Bliss, and our mission was to comprise a new battalion that was in anti-aircraft artillery. And but the point of it was, I came to this part of the country, and after my basic training in this dry, hot, dusty area of the United States, when I left, I said, I'll never come back to this part of the world again. And I live to eat my words. I'm where I need to be.
I think we need to tell everybody that when you talk about the end of the world out here in the desert, from where you grew up at in Pennsylvania, there is a big, drastic change.
Well, all I can say is I'm glad they're there and I'm here, because I'm so acclimated to the people, the area, and everything it has to offer, that I'm just in the perfect place in my life where I need to be.
You know, having grown up in Kentucky, which is not that far from Pennsylvania, the low hill countries, all the trees, all the green, and I'd come to New Mexico and spend my summers and then go back to Kentucky, and I got claustrophobic.
Well, Chuck, what about the winters, though? Winters up there.
Now, the winters are a little different.
You bet.
I don't miss the knee-deep snow.
And the cold wind and the blizzards and all that
and
good
the
stuff.
humidity that drives you bonkers and et cetera.
Yeah.
But then after you were at Fort Bliss, which I'm sure in 1940 seemed like the end of the earth and out in the middle of God's forsaken country, because that's about what it was back then.
That was very, very new to me, and I was not overwhelmed, but I didn't think that I would ever make that place, such a place, my home.
But aren't the sunsets beautiful off the Franklin Mountains?
Oh, the mountains are beautiful, yeah, and the scenery, gorgeous. It's nothing like that area.
What brought you to Odessa, though, to get into broadcasting?
When I got out of the Army, I went back to my job in New York, and I always thought about I would really enjoy being a radio announcer. And I went to radio school and took up the course. And before I had finished the course, actually, the instructor said, "Well, you're good enough to go out and get a job." So I put an ad in Broadcasting Magazine, and where did I get a reply from? From Odessa, Texas, and Lubbock, Texas. And I chose Lubbock, and here I am.
Now, you weren't one of those graduates of John Cameron Swayze's radio schools, right?
He was one of the top-notch newscasters, yeah, way back. He was a reader and very popular.
Yeah, John Cameron Swayze, Ed Murrow, that whole group.
But that was actually after, in this area, when I came here for a job in radio, they did not have television. Television was yet to come. So radio was king, and I enjoyed the status of being a fairly popular radio announcer on a popular radio station.
Well, now, a mutual friend of ours got you out here.
Oh, yes, and he reminds me that he hired me. Roy Elsner, yes, he answered my ad in Broadcasting Magazine, and I made an audition disc. We didn't have tapes. Tapes weren't in progress.
You made the old wax disc?
Right. Mm-hmm. And I sent him my disc, and we exchanged phone calls, and so I came down here for my first job in radio. My idea was to stay a year to learn the business and go back to the big time.
You know, I think a lot of us came to the Permian Basin on that concept. Well, we'll come here for a year, and then I don't know what bug it is that bites you, whether it's the people, which certainly is there, the climate we've talked about, something gets in your blood and you become part of the Permian Basin.
Yeah, and let me tell you this. I did leave my job after a year, and I started driving back up north. And it was winter, and the further north I got, the more snow there was on the ground. And I thought, what am I doing up here when back in Odessa it's so nice and warm? So I called Elsner and said, "Is my job still open?" He said, "Yes," and I went back, and I've been there ever since.
And Roy actually hired you twice.
and he makes mind of that too every once in a while when I see him, yeah. So when I got to Odessa, I have a picture of what it looked like in downtown Odessa, and the Lyric Theater was there. Were you here when the Lyric Theater was done?
No, that was a little before my time.
And Stein's Clothier was in a portion of the Elliott Hotel, and it was pretty primitive down there, but I noticed in the picture there's a bus service, and we had some, well, what you would call bus service. It wasn't very reliable, but it carried people from place to place. And my time at KECK was wonderful. It was a learning experience. The building where the studios was located was on top of People's Furniture Company, and both of those businesses were owned by Ben and Betty Netto. And they were stalwarts in the community in business, and they were very instrumental in getting a lot of things done.
Now, where exactly was that now in relation to today?
I'm glad you asked, because the theme of the slogan for People's Furniture Company was first in quality, second to none, third in Lee in downtown Odessa. And that was, so it was in third and Lee. And the studios...
That wasn't far off the heart of town.
It indeed was. Right. And the studio had a station identification went KECK 920 across the street from Davis Chevrolet, Odessa's oldest automobile institution. Now, you don't remember Davis Chevrolet, do you? Well, they soon sold out, though, to the other people who had Bronco Chevrolet.
Well, see, when I went to work, ours was, this is WNBS 1340, Murray, Kentucky, the birthplace of radio.
The birthplace of radio? Come on now.
Nathan Bowman Stubblefield, the guy that invented radio.
Oh, okay, okay.
So
Because I remember KDKA claims they were the first radio station.
well, yeah. Now that's another whole different part of history. But when you first came here, then Odessa was pretty well contained in that small, what we call the old downtown area.
Yes, and let me tell you this: when we had an advertisement for Colonel McCall, he was a realtor, and he was selling lots on East 8th Street that extended out to Highway 80. Now I thought to myself, now who would ever buy lots on East 8th Street? And that in the future became a bustling, thriving area for businesses of all kinds, and anybody who made investments in that land made a lot of money. Now for me to think, somebody who would buy that land? Of course I wasn't business-minded to think that some land like that would be so
Well, when they
profitable.
built Lamar, it sat out there on the very edge of nowhere, and that was just inside of Dixie. And they thought that was, oh my gosh, anybody going to build out there where Lamar Elementary, and then the old Sears building, which is now part of the courthouse annex, was built in out
So
there.
both of us have seen great growth in Odessa here.
Oh, when I came here, you know, none of that out east was everybody's nightmare. Nobody thought anybody'd live out there.
I have a picture of the inside of KECK at the master control room. Now any disc jockey looking at this picture would say, that was master control. Of course, everything is digitized nowadays. We had these 78 RPM turntables, and the 45s were just coming into vogue, and we had that attached to the...
You had to screw it backwards to get the little...
very, very antiquated according to today's standards, but we were very
but
modern.
that was state of the art then.
That's right, you betcha. Mm-hmm.
And for Odessa at that time, that was probably a step ahead of where a lot of other stations were.
It was, yeah. So eventually I took a part-time job out of Channel 2 when they were still the only station in the area, television station, and gradually just made the transition to...
Now everything then was live, and if it was recorded, it was either a movie film that had been produced and you were airing, or it was the old kinescope.
Yeah, they called it the kinescope, yeah, and Channel 2 at that time was the only station, so they had programs from whoever they chose to show. They had Ed Sullivan Show, and they had the Today Show. So it was a mixture of what they wanted to choose.
Now, when you went to Big Two, then what did you do?
Well, I did a little bit of everything. I have before the TV Guide came on the scene, I was written up in one of those as Dashing Dan. Dashing Dan? Well, it gave a little bit of what I did out there. I did the 10
That
o'clock
almost
news.
sounds like a swashbuckler, Dashing Dan Kalenak.
I did the 10 o'clock news. I did an afternoon program called The House Party. Not like Art Linkletter's House Party, but it was having local people talk about what they did in the community. And generally just whatever was required of an all-around person that...
Well, I think my point was, in those days, everybody did almost everything.
That's right.
Because
yeah. Mm-hmm.
it was, I don't want to call them small operations, but literally they were. The sets weren't much bigger than what we have right here, even though we're sitting in a large studio.
Yeah. Well, now, I might point out also that their studios was a reconverted mess hall, Army mess hall out there originally. So they had pretty much room. You can imagine what an Army mess hall is like. So they made it available for the cameras to roll around in the studio.
What did they do for soundproofing?
That was a problem. They almost built the studios where one of the hangars was, and Mr. Drury, who was the owner, heard the train rumble by, and he said, no, we don't want this. So they moved back further away from the tracks at the time. So it wasn't that bad. It worked out pretty well.
Because I was just thinking the echo factor in those days would have been pretty...
So one of the things that was impressive in my days out there was we had the first telethon out there, the March of Dimes telethon. And we had Catherine Grayson. Do you remember Catherine Grayson? If you... Boy, you're younger than I thought there. Come on, she was a musical star of Hollywood. And she had a very great voice that was out of this world. But the thing that impressed me about her, she was so down to earth. She was easy to talk to. And in the early morning hours when there was very little to do, she'd grab the broom and start sweeping up the place that was, you know, as happens when you have a lot of people in the studio. So she was one of the main ones that I was very, very impressed with. And I think it was Art Townsend, who was the president of Cardinal Chemical at the time, before they went off and merged again. He sponsored bringing those stars in to this area for the March of Dimes telethon.
Well, now, when you were there for a period of time, and then you moved on to Odessa's
Channel 7,
television,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
KOSA.
Yeah, I moved there as continuity director and gradually moved up to doing just the same things that I did at Channel 2. I was the weatherman for quite a while. I did an afternoon program.
Can you still do the weather? Can you point to the...
No. Now, we have a picture of me at the weather desk. It wasn't a weather desk. It was a movable blackboard, and there was nothing that you could, I mean, there, to think of the...
Now, Dan, you're telling me you didn't stand in front of the blue screen and do all the chroma
Nothing.
key
That was
and
unthinkable
that?
at that time, I think. I mean, we had a grease pencil and we had a marker, and we put down, we draw the fronts that were coming through and wrote on the temperatures for each of the cities, and it was very unsophisticated, to tell the least. Yeah,
Well, now it was sophisticated for its day.
Today, I don't know.
You were probably state of the art back then. Now, did you dress up in your little clown suit or something and go out there and do it?
No,
That's the
no,
first
no.
I remember a TV weatherman was dressed up like a clown, and he'd do all the stuff. And I thought, what has that got to do with one thing with the other?
No,
but
we didn't have any of those back then. We had I think Chuckles the Clown, who did an afternoon program, was part of an afternoon program, but the weather.
See, the first TV I ever saw came out of Louisville, Kentucky. WHAS.
Oh, yes.
Went from their Clear Channel radio to they were a CBS affiliate, but like KMID then in those days, they carried programs from everything.
Yeah.
But they were always delayed
Mm-hmm.
because they'd come in by film or kinescope.
And who thought of the satellite? I guess that was in the dream stage. It's amazing.
Or the coaxial cables, which were bigger than this saddle back when
I remember
that was
them.
done.
I remember them talking about the coaxial cable. When Channel 2 was trying to get on a cable of their own, Albert S. Kelly, who was a clothier in Midland, said Channel 2 was getting the baling wire network. They were building their own network, and it didn't work as much as it did. But competition is good. When Channel 7 came on the air, well, then things just went ahead for both of them. They made progress in their transmission, the picture, and then they brought in color. You know, it was black and white way back when.
Well, now, were you involved in local television when there was a character here called Admiral Foghorn?
You don't remember? Yes, I was Dangerous Dan, and when he was out of town, when he was out of pocket, I took over. And I have a picture with him with Festus of Gunsmoke fame. He was in town with his other partner to celebrate Channel 7's anniversary of some kind. And he was just a great guy to be able to talk to, and there was no pretentiousness about him. He had his bandana on, he had his outfit on, and I had my Dangerous Dan hat and my badge, and I was Admiral Foghorn. You remember him?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, when y'all were doing all that, was that over at the old station off of Whitaker?
Oh, yes,
were
yes.
you
Mm-hmm.
Then,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And
One thing I wanted to bring out is when I was the news director at Channel 2 in 1958, the oil industry was on its heels. I mean, it was on a downturn. It was the oil industry in the country was really suffering. And I wrote to Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time. And I managed to keep that letter, and he says, thank you for a note of March 19th. He says in the second, I am urging the administration to use its authority given it by Congress to curb the excessive imports of petroleum and petroleum products that have brought about the present situation. Way back then, they were talking about cutting the imports. Now, what has actually happened?
We've increased the imports.
Exactly. I mean, I thought it was kind of ironic, but way back then, they could see that something was wrong with the oil industry, but where has it gone now? To, you know, the sky's the limit as far as the need for the oil.
Well, back then, when you could buy gas for quarter a gallon, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Can anybody remember that?
You know.
Golly.
Remember when postage stamps were 3 cents?
Yeah. Yes. Uh-huh.
Who in the world would have thought that you'd be sitting here looking at gasoline at $3 a gallon? You know, I mean, let alone the fact that we were importing so much. Yeah. And here we are sitting in the Great Permian Basin with tremendous opportunities for new energy sources like Futurgen.
Yes, it's pretty incredible when you think of the advances. When I think of advances in radio and in television and in computers, it boggles my mind. I just can't comprehend some of these advances. But I'm glad that I'm living to see what is occurring in my lifetime.
Well, you know, nowadays when you see the TV crews and going out and they're carrying these little cameras that are at boast maybe a couple of pounds, you know, and
yeah,
all this.
Yeah.
And you think about the cameras that were available back when you first started in television, and it probably took 2 guys and a team of horses to lift one up. I mean,
they had to be very versatile and fast on their feet to get these different angles when they had to turn the shots to wide angles to very close-ups, and it was.
They had the 3 lenses on the front. You had to twist them like a flashlight.
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing. What are one of the more memorable things that you remember about broadcasting here?
Very early in my career, I remember when they had that air base in Big Spring, and over Midland, a jet and a passenger plane collided. That was incredible. We made it over there. We didn't have the facilities. Well, we had very antique facilities for recording that, but it just, a jet and a passenger or a small plane colliding together, I guess that really stands out as the first thing that really ever happened that will always remain with me. And I think, I don't remember if there was any fatalities or not, but it did come down on a house. But as I remember, there weren't fatalities, but it's just incredible to think something like that would happen. It can.
There's a picture that you have in your collection of when you're reading the news on the first radio station here that you were working with in the Permian Basin. And again, what is the newspaper you're reading from?
It was the Nanty Glow Journal. It's a weekly from the town of Nanty Glow, Pennsylvania. And I thought the people back home would get a kick of knowing that somebody was reading their paper on the air.
The old hometown boy makes good in Odessa, Texas. And they're going, where's Odessa, Texas?
But getting up to the present time, as I say, I continue to be blessed in every way, and my interest in Benjamin Franklin will remain forever, because as I bring out in the book that I wrote, that he's the only man who signed all 4 documents that were critical to the creation of the United States of America, and he did it after he was 70 years old. Every day when he got up out of bed, he asked himself the question, what good shall I do this day? And throughout his life, his accomplishments, nobody has ever managed to, or even could, equal what he did for his country.
Dan, let me ask you a really tough question here. You're pretty immersed in Ben. You've got a pretty good handle on the man and his philosophies and his thinking. Could a man like Benjamin Franklin be elected president today?
That's a good question. I don't know. The thing of it is, when these men wrote the Constitution, they made some safeguards in there to separate the rights of property and the rights of people. The rights of property and the rights of people. As one man said, there would always be this contention between wealth and the ordinary person. And these safeguards were written in the Constitution. And one of them was that the senators would be appointed by the states and not elected by popular vote. Now, this is a very significant thing, because if the senators were appointed by the states, then they would not have to spend these millions and millions of dollars to get elected. They would be appointed by the states. But now all the money pours out to get these senators elected every 6 years, and it's one of the safeguards that one of the three safeguards that they put into the Constitution that was revoked in 1913.
When you look back over your career in broadcasting and that, and you first remember when you were reading the news and covering the news and bringing it into the public eye, either through radio or television, compare that with a reporter today. What do you see in the way of accessibility, reporters' way they covered the news then, as versus today?
Well, I don't know. There are so many differences, Chuck. For one thing, the news organizations have exploded to cover with people worldwide. And back then, as John Cameron Swayze did, he read the news like every other.
The old rip and read.
Yeah, like we did in radio. And but nowadays they have, the instant communication. They have the cell phones that can send pictures from one place to another. So it has expanded to a point where it's instantaneous, and it's a wonder. I guess it's good, but that still doesn't prevent the news, I believe, from being slanted, if you will, because you have to, I guess, inject your own feelings into what's happening here and yonder.
Is there a difference in the ethics of what is reported?
You're asking me some hard questions. I don't know. Some people would say O'Reilly is unethical. No, I wouldn't say that. I don't know. Well, I'm not going to go into that too far. You're getting me involved into something.
Let me just ask you here, in quoting out of your book here,
okay,
on some Ben Franklin things, in good old Poor Richard's Almanac, the guy really did some marvelous things.
He made a fortune on publishing that from 1732 to 1749.
The half-truth is often a great lie.
Isn't that so? Isn't that what Adolf Hitler did? He spoke so many half-truths, and people took it up as truth. I mean, and that happens all the time. I'm not going to mention politicians, but
well, you got another one here. The good old Poor Richards again. Many have quarreled about religion that never practiced it.
Amen, brother. Amen. Well, you might mention that book then while you're at it here. That
the book again is called Benjamin Franklin and America's Gift to the World, and what prompted me to ask you the question on could he ever have been elected president? He was considered to be a candidate for the first presidency.
Right. That was way back when he, as I remember, one teacher in elementary school said Benjamin Franklin would have been president except that he was too old. And that's all she said. And every time I saw a president in a parade or being inaugurated, I would wonder, what did she mean by that? Why would he? And then I discovered that he was the man who was most responsible for getting the help that George Washington needed to win the Revolutionary War. He signed the Treaty of Friendship with France. He signed the Treaty of Peace, in which England finally acknowledged the independence of the United States of America. And finally, when he could hardly walk, he had to be carried in a sedan chair from his home to the convention hall in a sedan chair because he could hardly stand. But nonetheless, he took part in the deliberations that created the Constitution of the United States of America. It's truly an amazing thing. And I don't know, I guess I feel that I personally owe this man a debt because he did so much for me. Not only for me, for everybody in the United States today. And that's partially why this book is out.
There's a philosophy, a saying, or however you want to express it, that's attributed to Ben Franklin, that talks about his reflection on the sun that was carved into the chair on the dais of the Constitutional Convention. What do you see in that? Was it a Republic rising, or was it a?
Well, that's what he said. He always often wondered what that chair, what that sun on the chair symbolized, whether it was a setting sun or a rising sun. But when they completed the Constitution, he could see that it was indeed a rising sun. He could see the Republic rising into great status in the world. Yes, it was something that he wrote about, the fact that he remembered that significantly. You
recently did a book signing for the public at the Ector County Library. And there's a picture of you with a couple of young ladies there, very younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
Does this younger generation see a relevance to Benjamin Franklin?
Well, I'll tell you what, it gives me a great deal of delight and pleasure when I give my program to a school and I get notes from the children, from the students that said they learned so much about Ben Franklin and the fact that he did good for others. I mean, it was his return to God Almighty for this life that he was enjoying. What good shall I do this day? And that was not just a saying, it was a slogan that he lived by. And hey, you can't compare with him with anybody. I did get some publicity from a television station in Houston, and if we can go to that now, we'll see what they. This is right after Permian won the state championship at about 1990, so it's a few years old, and let's watch that a minute.
You know, Odessa's famous for a lot of things, for oil, probably most famous for Mojo, that famous high school football team that once again is the champions of the state of Texas. But they're also famous for one other thing, a fellow who just loves Benjamin Franklin.
Richard's Almanac was one of the, made him, as it were, a millionaire. He was so religious. And in his life, in his autobiography, he tells that he depended on God, but he also at the same time said, God helps those who help themselves. This is another large biography of Benjamin Franklin. Franklin signs the Friendship Treaty with France. Benjamin Franklin was the first one to be known as the father of his country. Okay, let's talk about his autobiography.
His name is Dan Kalenak, and he is a former employee of a local TV station in Odessa. And he just loves to preach the merits of his hero, Ben Franklin.
Did you know that he is the only man who signed all 4 documents that were critical to the creation of the United States of America, and he did these after he was 70 years old. He did it after he invented the lightning rod, he started the first hospital, he started so many things for the benefit of mankind, and he is an example for us today. Everybody in America today owes him a debt of gratitude.
Dan has been collecting Franklin memorabilia most of his life. He grew up in Franklin's home territory in the States, Pennsylvania, but moved to Texas in the 50s. As far back as he can remember, he has always had an overwhelming attraction to the man and his achievements. He collects Ben Franklin pictures and books and coins and medallions, and stamps, among other things. One of his stamps comes from Russia. There's a room in his house that is bulging with Franklin paraphernalia, and even Dan Kalenak admits that no one in his family is as attracted to his collection as he is. He would like someday to put it all on display at the Presidential Museum in Odessa.
Somewhere where it can be displayed and appreciated, because things aren't appreciated until you share them with somebody, just your possessions, and that's another thing that Franklin points out, that he's just grateful and thankful for the many blessings, and the only way he can return anything to God is by doing good for mankind. That was one of his philosophies in his life.
Dan puts his show on the road whenever asked. He has a colonial outfit and his collection is semi-portable, and often he shows up at schools to talk about his hero.
People like to call me Benjamin Franklin, but I like to be known as Benjamin Franklin's public agent. I like to talk about him because he is indeed the most amazing American of all times. I mean,
his presentation is unusual, and he's often mistaken for George Washington. But that's one of the reasons he's here, to tell the world and the school kids about Ben Franklin, scientist, inventor, philosopher, and educator. The kids love the break from regular class, and Dan Kalenak enjoys playing the part.
I just love to tell the life of Ben Franklin to the elementary school kids, in particular because they're so anxious to know about how the country came into being, and they ask so many interesting questions about his life that aren't generally available to in the course of studies. But it's their receptivity makes it well worthwhile to appear before a class or an assembly and tell them about how lucky we are to live in these United States. And these men 200 years ago were thinking about us all, that we're going to come after them. And it's just amazing. And we should be grateful to all of these men. And I enjoyed talking to you. I hope you've learned something today that you'll carry on through your lifetime. And remember, when you want the formula for success, why not try Benjamin Franklin's autobiography and find out what he has to say there. The miracle of America. It's amazing how this nation, without an army, without supplies, but of course George Washington was then the star of the Revolutionary War, naturally, and he had a lot of setbacks too. When Benedict Arnold, his trusted aide, decided he was going to turn traitor and turn not only Washington and his army, but everything else over to the British. And Washington said, now, what do I do when something like this has occurred, you know? And his most trusted aide turns to the British.
Look at Ben Franklin. His son was a Tory. His son became a Tory governor.
And most people don't know that. That was probably the most deepest disappointment in Franklin's life, when he urged the men to sign the Declaration of Independence, and his son, who Franklin had gotten the job of the position for his son of being the royal governor of New Jersey, decided he was going to stay with the British. But Chuck, this is not so unusual. This is unusual insofar as he was Franklin's son, but there were so many people in the United States at that time did not want independence. As a matter of fact, about a third of the people wanted independence, a third did not want independence, and a third were neutral. So it was an uphill battle. The country was formed by a minority, if you will, that wanted independence and freedom from the oppression that England was putting onto the colonies. And Franklin writes about the reconciliation that was tried by the son after the war, and he wanted to sort of come to peace. The letter that Franklin wrote to his son said, you went by the biblical injunction, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto, saying that he was faithful to the government that they had at the time. But there was another way of looking at it. If you wanted to stay under the oppression and the taxation without representation, well, that was another matter. But Franklin said it never could come back to the way it was. The son had already migrated to England and was there as, an English subject.
Did Franklin ever really reconcile himself to the fact that he and his son had had such a parting? Did he ever?
No, he said in the letter that it was very hurtful to him, and he wanted to drop the subject. Yeah. And so they never really did get back. But Franklin was never one to really hold grudges. It was just a matter that happened, and that was the way it was. And in his will, he just left him a minimal number of items, and he mentioned the fact that he had deserted him in his old age.
But using that as an example of how many families in this country were split then. I mean,
oh, yes.
It was almost like our first Civil War. It was families against families.
Yes, it was, and in truth and in fact, it was a civil war. What we call the Civil War was the war between the states, and it created families. But more of a civil war was when the revolutionaries in South Carolina, there was a group of Americans who were fighting on the side of the British against the Americans. So it was touch and go until Yorktown. You familiar with Yorktown? When General Cornwallis, Britain's greatest general, was forced to surrender to these lowly Americans. That was a great embarrassment for everybody in Europe, in England. And the ruling parties said, it's about time that we ended this. We poured so much manpower and wealth and everything else into this war, and we've gotten nowhere.
But even at that, it still took another 2 years to get that Treaty of Paris signed.
Hey, you're pretty well versed on that, yes. The Battle of Yorktown was 81, and it was until 83 that Franklin was the head man in getting this Treaty of Peace. And, America was finally free.
But what's really interesting on that, though, is that he kept the negotiations going when his two associates were willing to settle for a far less than what Franklin was willing to settle for.
Franklin had wit and wisdom, and he was so charming, and he, during his life, he made it a practice never to directly contradict anybody, to say no. He had a method of saying, well, you may be right in some instances, but let's consider this. He just had a way about him that it was impossible to be angry with a man. He had a way of dealing with people that was incomparable.
How many years have you felt compelled to share the message of Franklin with people, especially with young people?
Well, it's probably about at least 35 years, yeah. And I've gotten so many letters from kids that they've written personally thanking me for coming to their schools. And what I bring with me are a lot of mementos from the Declaration of Independence to the Treaty of Peace and to the Constitution, to the 4 documents, and the many stamps that many countries, even Russia during the Cold War issued a stamp honoring Benjamin Franklin, if you can imagine. And I have one of those copies, yeah. So,
well, back when you and I were growing up, there was a lot more study of what today we would call political science, of learning about how and why this country was created. Do you see a desire among young people today to still want to learn about the causes? You talked about a while ago, taxation without representation. Well, do we really understand what that is today?
Yeah. I think if the ideas are implanted in these young students, they would grasp it. I think there's so much interest in there and so much intrigue and the inner workings of the political process that they would realize that they do have a vote, and they do have the ability or the honor to communicate with their legislators and the government, and their input is considered very important. So to me, it's a calling, I guess you could say, but I love it. It's just great to live in this wonderful land. Both of my parents were immigrants. They married in America, but I could have very easily been born in Europe, and I thank God for this wonderful land that I live in. And
well, when your parents came here and settled in Pennsylvania, your father was a coal miner?
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine a coal miner working during his lifetime and supporting a family of 11 children. That's what my dad did. I could never do that, but hey, you got to do what you got to do, I guess. That's work in Europe. That was prior to World War I. There was nothing there. There was no employment or jobs or anything, and I guess everybody then knew that America was the place to go.
Well, at that point in time, Europe was still ruled by a large number of small principalities or empires.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Austro-Hungary Empire, the German Empire, the British Empire, France even had an empire then.
Yeah.
The concept of a democracy as we know it today in the world, we were still a very unique position.
We were the first nation to come up with the idea of the rights of man. Yes, the rights of man were superior, supreme. Yeah, and hey, again I say thank God for my heritage and my blessings. Hey, I figure I'm very well blessed in living in a land that has all these opportunities where my parents came and all these Europeans came at that time.
You know, I think one of the things that's fascinated me about Franklin over the years is the fact that he created and patented so many things, but never charged people for them.
I'll correct you, Chuck. He did not patent them.
Correct. You're right.
Okay. Now, in his autobiography, he tells about the fact. Well, of course, the lightning rod. He printed it in Porter's Almanac and told the people how to make lightning rods to protect their houses. And when he invented the Franklin stove, he tells that he was offered a patent but refused for reasons of his own. He said something like God gave him the thoughts that created this invention, and what he was able to give to the public, he thought it was his duty. And that's not, do we have anybody like that today? Come on. Well, I think it wouldn't have been anything wrong for him to take that patent, but he had a different concept.
Well, you did a book signing down at the public library. I've been known to haunt the libraries on occasion. Benjamin Franklin brought the concept of libraries.
You're so right. Yeah, he came up with so many things that were first and beneficial.
Volunteer fire departments.
Right.
Bifocals. I love him for that one.
Bifocals, you betcha. Me too. Every time I put my glasses on, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, Franklin has a relevance today that all of us are taking part in.
So much so. He even thought about keeping the streets clean. And you know, way back then they had cobblestones, but they still got dirty. And he tells in his autobiography how he got a lady that was kind of decrepit to clean. She came up to his door and asked if there was any work he wanted to do, and he said, "Well, clean up this street and come back, and we'll see what we can do." So she cleaned up this street, and she did it so fast that he sent his servant out to see that she did a job, and she did such a incredible job that Franklin was astounded that this old lady could do a cleaning job in such a short time that he decided there was some way that he could get the streets cleaned by people in the city, because in the summer the streets were dusty, in the rainy weather they were muddy, in the winter they were dirty. So Nothing was too small or big for him to see if he could improve the lives of people in the city.
Well, you were Pennsylvania, the Franklin Institute in Pennsylvania, endowed by Franklin, and the tremendous scientific things that it has
And he
fathered.
started the academy that is now the University of Pennsylvania. To say that he invested his money, he put his money when he died in his will in a trust that would benefit the cities of Boston and the city of Philadelphia. And it has grown to millions and millions and millions of dollars. And he said it would continue for 200 years. And at the end of 200 years, it has grown to such a point where they had to go to court to see what they could do with it. The object of it was to make loans to young entrepreneurs at a rate of 5% per year so that they would have money to begin their business with and learn. So he even had thoughts of doing good after he died with this huge amount of money that grew from this. I think it was $10,000 in silver that he began with.
But the one I like is the water trough for horses in Philadelphia.
Oh.
And you can still see it today. It's still there, the old water trough that he put, because poor animals got thirsty on hot, dusty days in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Dan, let me ask you one question as we close, or coming to a close here. If you were to choose what you would be remembered for in your contributions to the upbringing of Odessa, the broadcasting years, the education years, etc., what would you like to be remembered for?
Well, that's a hard question. Of course, my son wants me to make a biography of myself, and I don't see anything significant in that. But I think if this book makes it, and I'm working on a second book also, Benjamin Franklin in the first place. I don't know, that would be sufficient. I think Franklin has a saying somewhere that if you want to be remembered after you're dead and rotten, do something worth writing or write something worth doing or something on that order. So I've got my contribution in this little book that I have, and I hope to be able to publicize to the point where it might get some national publicity to promote it. Yeah.
When did Dan Kalenak and Benjamin Franklin fuse? When did you really? Oh,
it was pretty early when I started doing these programs at schools, and I saw the reception that these kids gave to it, and the questions they asked, and they wanted to know more and more about what he did and his family and his wife and kids, and doing all the things that he did for his country. If I can start them to thinking and to carry the ball, so to speak, and go on to learn more on their own. Get the autobiography and read it.
And it's still in print.
Yes, it is. More than ever. You go on the internet and you'll find all kinds. There's an author by the name of Frank Betcher who followed Franklin's formula for success. And he wrote a book about the autobiography, and he said on the precepts that he gives, this guy Frank Betcher says, reject it, Franklin's formula for success, reject it, and you reject one of the most practical ideas ever offered you. He says, I know what it did for me. I know it can do the same for anyone who will try it. It's not an easy plan. There is no easy plan, but there is a sure plan, and you'll find that in Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. Amen and amen.
Well, I remember my grandfather telling me, a penny saved is a penny earned. And for the longest time, I thought, man, what a genius my grandfather was. He read it in Benjamin Franklin's poor Richard's Almanac, as we all know.
Yeah.
I mean, and he read it as a kid back in the old McGuffey readers thing. So
I heard it early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Heard that in probably the 3rd or 4th grade, yeah.
those are truisms that are still with us.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, Dan, Benjamin Franklin, Kalenak, we've enjoyed visiting with you on this edition of West Texas Pioneers.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you, Chuck.
Thanks for walking the memory trail with us. Join us again next time when ECISD Television presents another chapter of the Heritage of Odessa Founders Journal of West Texas Pioneers.